former President Donald Trump, defiant and angry Tuesday night in New Jersey after a historic court appearance earlier in the day in Miami. He called the indictment a political persecution. The former president pleaded not guilty to 37 felony counts at the federal courthouse in Miami. He is accused of mishandling classified documents and attempting to block the Justice Department's attempts to get them back. For more on this, we're joined by Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett, Congressional Correspondent Scott MacFarlane, who was inside the courtroom in Miami today, and Political Director Fin Gómez. Major, let's go to you first. The anger, the defiance, the lack of factual information conveyed by the former president, typical at moments like this of maximum sort of pressure and anger that he faces. But ultimately, this may result in yet more political benefit, sustaining his front-runner status and potentially raising millions of dollars off this indictment.
Yes, a couple of things, Ed. Just a second ago, the audience spontaneously saying happy birthday to the former president. His birthday will be tomorrow, June 14th. Audience very enthusiastic in response to a couple of things the president is asserting. One, that he had absolute authority under the Presidential Records Act to have all the documents that he had, and suggesting that he had declassified them, though there is no evidence that he went through any formal or informal process to do exactly that. And then a long litany of descriptions about things that Hillary Clinton did, that Vice President Joe Biden did when he was vice president or as a senator, all, he says, unprosecuted, and he is therefore, in his expression here tonight, the victim of a political persecution. This crowd is receptive, as I said, and this is a lengthy and sometimes factually problematic assertion, not only about what his conduct was, but the conduct of those he is attacking in a political context. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Vice President Biden and then Senator Biden. And as you're hearing over my shoulder, there is a kind of vaudevillian call and response to mentions of either James Comey, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, etc. This is the political part two of a day-long drama, one that first played out in a strictly legal context in Miami, but is now here in Bedminster playing pure politics.
And both you and Finn had reported that there were plans tonight to raise up to $2 million off of this. So clearly the campaign continues on and anticipates reaping considerable financial advantage after yet another day in court.
Worth pointing out, it's a pre-scheduled fundraiser that has now become part fundraiser, part rally, and part expression of grievance. All three commingling together quite tightly here in the evening outside in Bedminster. And the $2 million is a goal. We'll see. It's not a huge amount of money. And as Fin Gómez well knows, as you well know, Ed O'Keefe, fundraising for the Trump campaign has several purposes. One political, one legal. He's got to pay his legal team. The Republican National Committee no longer pays former President Trump's legal bills. He's got to do that himself. So fundraising here, in some respects, is for the campaign, but it's also a pass-through to a large and ever-growing team of lawyers.
And we should point out, for the sake of context, that most other Republican contenders are also fundraising this week, as is the sitting president later in the week and next week as they near the end of the month and are coincidentally using this week to raise money for their ongoing campaigns. Finn, in Miami, we heard several 2024 candidates in the last 24 to 36 hours show openness to criticizing the former president, most notably now Tuesday night, the Wall Street Journal editorial board publishing part of an interview with former Vice President Mike Pence, who now is raising concerns about what's alleged, in addition to Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador and South Carolina governor, who quite notably stuck her neck out on Monday by suggesting she had concerns about this, in part because people like her own husband, who are in the military, are being deployed, and him holding on to these documents could have put them and military operations at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is also notable, Ed, is that, Bedminster was also cited twice in the 37-page indictment. It was cited when Trump showed a Pentagon plan of attack to someone who did not have that clearance, and also when he shared other classified information. So I think it's notable that this is where the day ends, right? This is where now candidate Trump is now speaking to his faithful and is now also focusing on raising funds for his campaign and, as Major noted, for his legal funds. But it is notable. It is notable, and I think part of that, Ed, is also because of our own CBS News polling that came out just a few days ago, and also new polling today that shows that he still has this dominant position in this early stage in the Republican primary race. 30 to 40 points, not just in our poll, but in other polls, the ABC poll, that shows that, you know, if you're a rival in this race, now is the time to contrast. One of those issues that could possibly be, and I think some see this, especially Chris Christie and others who have that national security background, but that Achilles heel could be national security. And the fact that he was showing, classified maps, the fact that he's showing a plan of attack and other classified information that dealt with national security in such a cavalier way, allegedly, I think that does raise some concerns, not just among this Republican field that was for the last few months pretty timid, not so vocal and critical towards the former president, but also to some perhaps in the Republican electorate. So it'd be interesting to see in the coming weeks how that is handled and how that is approached by others, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's going to be heading to Nevada for the first time this weekend.
And in fact, DeSantis plus today, former House Speaker Paul Ryan on CBS Mornings making the general election electability argument that if winning the primary is one thing, but he can't seem to find general election support sufficient enough to win back the White House. So we'll see. Scott MacFarlane, also there up high on a Miami balcony for us tonight, has had a heck of a day. He learned to appreciate today why the NBA team is named the Miami Heat, because he was out running in it today for us to give us a sense of what was going on in the courtroom. Take us back inside the federal courthouse. Remind us how it went and what stuck out to you as sort of the more dramatic or unique moments of what you witnessed.
There was so much symmetry, Ed, between Donald Trump's mannerisms and disposition in the courtroom here today as what we saw in the courtroom in Manhattan. Largely expressionless in his face, hunched over at the shoulders, leaning over the defense table, his arms crossed, infrequently speaking with the attorneys on either side of him and infrequently using the papers in front of him to jot down notes. He, as he walked out of the courtroom, was watched at every moment by the man sitting about 15 feet away. The special counsel, Jack Smith, was in the front row of this courtroom and eagle-eyed Trump as Trump walked out. It was about a 45-minute proceeding. Former president formally pleaded not guilty. Then we heard the release conditions, and they are remarkably light for the former president. He can still travel the world, doesn't surrender his passport, can travel throughout the country, travel internationally. The domestic travel is pretty important if you're running for the Republican nomination for president. And there's no bond money to put forward. He has an assured bond. Didn't even get a mugshot, Ed, because the marshals told us he's a pretty recognizable guy. There are a few photos of Donald Trump out there just in case law enforcement needs a reference later in this case. He had digital fingerprinting done. He was formally booked, that's the phrase, and he did meet with his new pretrial services officer. It was a hushed courtroom, pretty big, rather regal courtroom, the ceremonial courtroom here at the federal courthouse in Miami. There is a chance this case, if it goes to trial, could have its trial right here in Miami, far and away the largest and most secure complex the federal court system has in this southern district of Florida. And we learned in court today that this case is still headed for Judge Eileen Cannon, the Trump-nominated judge who sits in the West Palm Beach and Fort Pierce areas of the southern district of Florida. And yeah, Donald Trump has an official criminal case number, 23-CR 80101. He is a federal criminal defendant, clearly historical times, Ed. He is a U.S. president, a former president accused of a crime against the U.S.
And there is some unfinished business from the proceedings today, and we don't know yet when they'll be resolved. Among them, some kind of a deal regarding who exactly the former president can be speaking to, who happens to be on his payroll, and then issues related to Will Nada, the valet who served in the Navy, served him at the White House, and now works for him as his personal aide. Remind us what we're waiting to learn about all that.
Let's take them in order, Ed. First of all, there are going to be some restrictions on the number of people or some of the people with whom Donald Trump can speak about this case. Mind you, he is speaking to a live television feed about this case right now, but the court is going to order a certain number of possible witnesses, potentially his employees, potentially Secret Service agents, potentially his co-defendant, with whom he cannot talk about the case. That is a court order. It is not a recommendation. He will be required to honor it. That will likely be litigated. So much of what happens in this case is likely to be litigated, which is one reason why it's difficult to get our hands on what the possible timetable is here. They didn't even schedule the next official hearing in this case today. Could be weeks, could be months, could be here in Miami, could be elsewhere. And the other matter you referenced, which is Nada himself. He was not arraigned as scheduled today because he has not yet secured Southern District of Florida certified counsel, an attorney who is free to do business here. He has an attorney from out of town right now. Some of this did pop up on short notice. They didn't realize potentially that he'd be charged in the Southern District of Florida, maybe as late as last Thursday till they got that news. The former president had an 11th hour addition to his legal team to make sure he had local counsel here today so that he could be arraigned. And it's likely Nada will be formally arraigned in the next couple of weeks. He might not have to make the trip back here. They may be able to do it virtually.
Fin, you are not only our political director now, you used to cover the White House and you used to cover South Florida. I have one question that was percolating here in D.C. that you might be able to help us with. All of what transpired today, the motorcades in Miami and back to his home in New Jersey, the security around the courthouse for him and for others gathered, that was all taxpayer funded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So, and the only
as
real,
it often is, yeah.
Yeah, the only personal expense he would potentially have today was for the jet fuel and for the event he's hosting at his home tonight, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, and ostensibly paid for by his campaign or his super PAC. But yeah, that is primarily taxpayer funded, correct?
Right. And
yeah.
I mean, it's not every day that a former president gets like street closure, motorcade length transportation around a major American city. But in this case, at least, given the security precautions, they opted to do that, right?
That's correct. And, you know, and on a number of different levels, I feel that we have seen unprecedented actions, maneuvers, just overall. I mean, if you think about it, you know, we obviously had this is just an historic indictment. This is an historic day, an infamously historic day, if you want to describe it that way. But also that level of security, that level of sort of pomp and circumstance, if you will. I mean, that we have typically not seen that. Unless it is for a sitting president. So, yes, all of it is uncharted and a bit atypical.
Yeah, it's worth noting that. Major Garrett, as we close this out, back to you in New Jersey, what does the former president do next politically after this? Do we have any sense of whether there's campaign stops scheduled or other moves to be made on the campaign trail?
I will defer to Fin on the next scheduled appearances of the former president, but you can be certain that there will be more rallies and events, North Carolina, South Carolina, Iowa, maybe not in that order, but in the not too distant future. But one thing I want to make sure that the audience understands, just a few moments ago, former President Trump here in Bedminster said that for 7 years, the United States government has exercised a campaign, these are his words, of psychological warfare against the United States, using disinformation to paint him as something less than he is. That's what he just said, that for 7 years he has been the victim of a U.S. government psychological warfare campaign to portray him negatively and to wound him politically. That is the tone and tenor as this speech nears its conclusion of grievance articulated for this largely receptive audience here in Bedminster, New Jersey.
With whom does that resonate outside of conspiracy theorists at this point, I wonder?
I really don't know. It's not something I was expecting. It's not something he said after his indictment on charges in Manhattan. much of what he has said here tonight is reflective of the grievances he expressed then. There are some additional grievances he has expressed about similar, or what he purports to suggest are similar instances of mishandling of classified information, skipping over the entire process by which there was a request, a subpoena, and all these other things that completely make this Trump case fundamentally different from the others with which he was drawing comparisons. But Ed O'Keefe, I don't know who would sit at home or read the newspaper or scroll through their phone and say, yes, I've lived in America for 7 years and been subjected to a psychological warfare campaign to make me think something different than I otherwise would about Donald Trump. But yet, that is what he just said.
To be continued. Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett in Bedminster, New Jersey. Congressional Correspondent Scott MacFarlane and Political Director Fin Gómez in Miami. Thank you to you guys, to your teams who've been with you all day. Great to be alongside you for another historic day of legal and political coverage in America. We thank you.